So I'm quite surprised at the direction my life has taken. You too? Thought you were going to be a doctor? Art history major? Sorry, Dad. Well, look, I didn't come to Washington to get involved in law, politics, or government. I came because my family moved down from Syracuse, New York, to find better weather. And that was 18 years ago. Until 2009, my only career was in business. And now I find myself at a nonprofit, trying to resolve some of the most contentious issues facing our country.
Did I talk loud enough? I felt like I was...
And it's no secret that America feels more divided than it has for a long time. And you know about these divisions because you live and work here in this town, or you've watched enough episodes of House of Cards on Netflix that you're beside yourself upset at the way Washington is. The question is, are there other ways to create change than each of us pushing our own agenda as hard as we can? So we're stuck in gridlock. And you see the consequences all over Washington and around the country on big issues like education, or poverty, or economic growth, or the environment. Big issues where things are getting worse. And if gridlock is an unsolvable problem, then the best we can hope for is status quo. And you and I know that status quo will not meet the needs of the 21st century. So in 2009, I left my life in the private sector and joined my friend and mentor, Rob First, to start a nonprofit called Convergence, founded on the idea that there are antidotes to gridlock and partisanship. On most issues, if not all, no one person, group, or perspective holds all the answers, but better, stronger, and more lasting solutions can emerge if we foster more communication and more cooperation among those who disagree. Now, marriage has taught me a lot of things. And about 3 years ago, my wife, who I think is in the audience, a few months into our marriage, strongly encouraged that I start to learn how to garden. And I thought to myself, okay, that's pretty new. And recalled the vows that we gave and how watering the plants got in. But here's the truth. The first time you pour water on a seed that your wife has put into the ground, you have one thought: please God, help me not drown and kill this plant. And second, you realize that if you don't have the right mixture of dirt, fertilizer, and sunlight, no matter how much water you pour, nothing's going to happen. You need the right conditions on the ground for the plants to grow. And so that's the job that Convergence set out to do, to create the right conditions on the ground so that people in groups who are divided, don't trust each other, stuck in their own silos, or otherwise not collaborating, but who have the knowledge, resources, and influence to make a big difference on big national issues, feel empowered to redirect some of the energy they spend in conflict and pool their knowledge, resources, and influence to create real results and lasting change. Now, don't get me wrong. Gridlock is a tough problem, and there are at least 5 reasons why it's tough. And you see this on television. Powerful interest groups and the political candidates they support are often locked in hardline positions and demonize each other. Most of these groups believe that for their side to win, the other side has to lose. Fighting is easier than cooperating. Cooperating takes things like listening and patience and consensus, and that feels harder. And for the media, it sometimes can add fuel to the fire, exaggerating conflict to boost ratings or hyping opposing views to look balanced. And 5, it's really hard for you and I, the public, you and I, to mobilize in a way that can put pressure on these groups to fight less and cooperate more. These are difficult conditions, and it's why you see in this city that dysfunction appears to be the norm in our politics, and for some it's the way careers are built and money is made. But it doesn't have to be this way. We need 4 conditions to create an environment that promotes cooperation among conflicting groups. They can exist alongside what I just described, and they are creating a safe space for dialogue, building an agreed-upon framework, promoting trust and understanding, and ensuring diverse participation. And the rest of my talk is about them. Let's talk about safe space. Not long ago, I was in Pakistan, which I know is not the first place that comes to mind when you think of safe space. But there I was, in a Hertz rental car in the city of Karachi, being driven around by a young man named Mazhar. Now, Muzzer and I didn't speak the same language, but between hand gestures and broken sentences, we had a reasonably good conversation. Muzzer believed that most things wrong in Pakistan were the fault of America, and he was very convinced of his arguments. He was 30 years old, he had 2 daughters, he was married, and he had just raised enough money after 10 years of working to move his family into a 1-bedroom with a roof and a fan and overhead light. And that was a big deal for him. Both his daughters were in school. He was very proud of that. And his dream was that once they graduated, they would be so kind as to teach their father how to read. Because Muzzer dropped out of school in the 2nd grade to find a job. He'd been working ever since. Now, if I had one appointment that day, I would have been in the car for 45 minutes. And the only person I would have met was the guy who had a lot of bad things to say about America. But I had 4 appointments, and we had a lot of traffic that day. So I and he were in the car for a total of 7 hours. And so the second person I got to know, I could relate to very differently. And I told him about how my parents left Pakistan and settled in the U.S. to make a better life, about the neighborhoods my brothers and I grew up in, and the work we now do. And he asked questions, a lot of them, including how are we treated by our neighbors and by our colleagues? I said, very well. And then he said this, sir, the truth is, America is the land of opportunity and the land of laws. And my country has not yet figured out how to be either one. Can you imagine? He can barely speak English, he can't read a book, but he knew the values that we stand for. Honest communication in a safe space for a sufficiently long period of time can change the way people relate to each other. Because what gets shared after the positions you believe are the values, life experiences, hopes, fears, and dreams behind them. And when those get shared, you begin to hear each other differently. You listen not to find out where the next point is that you can score. You hear for what new wisdom you might gain. And barriers like status and power and perception and wealth, they give way, and the field on which common ground can surface irreversibly expands. Creating a safe space for dialogue is the first important condition to creating an environment that can promote cooperation among those who disagree. The second condition is to build an agreed-upon framework of the issue you're dealing with. Thomas Jefferson, you know him, right? Thomas Jefferson was not planning to go to the 1775 Continental Congress in Philadelphia. His uncle made him go. And when he got there, he hardly spoke a word in the sessions he sat through, but Thomas Jefferson was a good writer. And so the leaders of Congress assigned him the task that nobody else wanted to spend time doing: draft a Declaration of Independence. Can you imagine that? The war with Britain was on, but there was deep divisions among the colonies on how to proceed. Some thought that there was still a way to reconcile with Britain. Others thought that separation was the only approach. The case for independence had not yet been made, so the commitment to independence among the colonies was weak. The Declaration helped to change that. It gave everyone a unifying frame and a way to articulate 3 things: a shared understanding of the challenge and the opportunity, a shared set of values and goals, and a shared vision of the future upon which to base collective action. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, shared values, and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, shared goals, and that to secure these rights, which is the shared challenge and the opportunity, governments are instituted among men and derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, shared vision. If you can articulate the challenge and the opportunity in a way that unifies at the level of shared value, vision, and goals, you've got the second condition to create an environment that promotes cooperation among those who disagree. Now, Jefferson sat through many months of debates. He talked to many of the delegates one-on-one, and he listened to the disputes among them. And then he gave them language in the Declaration that allowed all the colonies a common way to explain and get behind the cause of independence. This takes hard work. It won't settle all the disputes, but it'll distinguish what matters now from what disagreements can be revisited later. And although others contributed to the draft before it was signed in 1776, Jefferson modeled personified the disposition necessary to do this kind of work. You can't get to a shared action plan on a complex problem if the major players involved define the problem in disconnected ways. And a unifying frame offers a way to define the problem that also implies a way forward through cooperation. It won't settle all the disputes, but it'll get cooperation started, and it will convey to those who disagree that they have been heard, so they can engage each other with respect and with civility. Now, how might that work today? Well, obesity and diabetes is a huge challenge in America. It costs lives, it raises insurance premiums, and our workforce is less productive. For a long time, the major groups on this issue, the food companies and the beverage companies, the doctors and the public health groups, the grocers and others, were in deep and bitter conflict about why the problem exists, whose fault it is, and what we can do about it. When we at Convergence began to work with them, a framing emerged that both simultaneously satisfied the interests of the business community and the public health folks, attracted new people to the table like insurance, and implied a powerful outcome through cooperation. The frame was this: instead of debating regulations and taxes, what if we could reduce diabetes and other nutrition-related diseases through market forces by increasing demand for healthier food among consumers? If consumers bought more food, companies would spend more marketing them. Grocers would put the food on better shelf space, and more research dollars would be spent in ways that would make good food and good tasting food that was also great tasting food that was also good for you. And that frame is holding. People who are divided for a long time are now working together, trying to see how their collective efforts can have that virtuous cycle go into effect. So those are the two first frames, two first conditions: a safe space for dialogue and a unifying frame. The third is to build trust and understanding. That's really hard to do, especially if most of the groups that you've seen on television and you hear about in the newspapers debate and demonize each other again and again and again. In 2004, the major national organizations around the issue of healthcare coverage began to meet in private dialogue. These folks were battle-tested and battle-weary. And although they agreed to meet as a group, there was deep distrust among them and real dislike among some. It took courage for them to show up, and you could feel the tension in the room on the first day. But as they went around the room for introductions, about halfway through, the top executive from the leading conservative organization in America stood up, introduced himself, and said, "I'm for universal coverage." Really? There was a gasp in the room. No one up until that point had actually said that, even though a number of the progressive groups went first. And he proceeded to say, "I just believe we should rely more on market forces than on government programs to achieve it." That one statement changed the entire tone in the room. People who'd come ready for a fight all of a sudden realized that someone they thought of as the enemy wasn't. He shared their goals but disagreed on how to get there. And after 2 years of conversation, these groups came to agreement on a substantive set of recommendations on expanding coverage for health in America, some of which has since been enacted into law in no small part because of the lobbying efforts they collectively pursued. The healthcare debate has not resolved, but on some big challenges, real progress was made. And that same gentleman from the conservative organization said that this was the best process he'd been in for 30 years in Washington. He said, "I'd known these people for a long time, but I didn't really know them." And in this process, a better result occurred because we took the time to understand each other and address the concerns we really had, instead of blindly advocating for the positions we held when we started. Organizations are staffed and led by people, and people talk to other people, not to organizations. People are not the sum of their titles, positions, and self-interests. Most of us want to be productive and solve problems. All of us want to be appreciated for who we are, what we know and believe, where we come from, and what we hope to contribute. To be treated with respect and positive regard creates a very different environment than one in which you feel negated and ignored. And as trust and understanding grows, people are willing to cooperate more. They're willing to confront hard issues directly. They're willing to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And as more people cooperate, they can bring more people along. So 3 conditions: a safe space for dialogue, a unifying frame, and a focus on trust and understanding. And the last one is to ensure diverse participation on any issue that you might think of, to ensure that those who are in the room reflect different and conflicting points of view, not the ones who are so hardened they can't listen, but the ones who are open yet far enough apart so that the creative tension arising from their sustained engagement leads to new solutions and new unlikely alliances for action. The power you create when powerful groups who disagree begin to work together is the reason why breakthrough solutions are possible and the reason why gridlock can be broken. On the 11th day of the healthcare coverage dialogue that I mentioned earlier, when the agreement was struck, a person from one of the most powerful organizations in the room came up to the project director and said, "You've ruined my life." When I first started, I knew how to cover the uninsured. I did the research, we had the answers. But having spent all this time with these smart people who care, I can't see the world the same way. When those of us who are used to being in the fight are all of a sudden in a set of conditions where the prospects of achieving through cooperation a result we did not previously imagine possible begin to emerge, we can have a remarkable transformation. We begin to see that for our side to win, the other side doesn't have to lose. So it's okay to disagree. That's the most important message I want you to take away. It's okay for someone else to see the world differently than you do and for you not to be mad at them. By creating a safe space for dialogue, a unifying frame, focusing on trust and understanding, and ensuring diverse participation, the conditions are there to create dialogue that leads to action and real results on big issues. But don't get me wrong. Dialogue leading to action does not mean forcing agreements on people through power plays or scoring backroom deals in ways that may or may not serve the public interest. We need new capacities to address our most deepest challenges in thoughtful and respectful ways. And we need to be open, we need to be confident in the task, but approach it humbly, not knowing where the best answers may come from, nor what kind of answers may lead to genuine breakthroughs that no one side or group can achieve. The skilled facilitation of individuals with differing sensibilities and perspectives is a powerful and untapped resource to unleash the creative powers we need to address the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you.